Hey everybody, I'm your host Caleb Trinkman with Rob Trinkman here, and we are in part 7 of our new Bible study called Heart of a Shepherd. And we've been looking at 6 different things, and this is our 6th one now, so it's gone by really quickly. But today we are looking at selfless love and isolation and loving one another. And they all have to do with each other. But let's be honest, we all have relationships issues, right?
Like you and I have a relationship. Can we talk about this offline?
Yeah. The point is that people are divided. People are divided for multiple reasons. Maybe they don't agree with opinions. Maybe they've had arguments, etc. But part of the reason is we just don't see people like we used to. 50, 60, 70 years ago when you were a kid.
Hey.
You would see people when you go to the gas station, the grocery store. You would see people when you went to the bank. Even if they weren't deep relationships, these were relationships that you could count on seeing someone, or maybe even the same person. And these are things that these are people you were able to connect with and share the love of God with, and just people that you could have great conversation with.
Yeah, we're just struggle with isolation in our world today. A few years ago, I realized that this was a real problem for me. I started to take inventory of my life, and I realized I don't have any real friendships. Sure, I have people I know, but I don't have anybody I can be real with and raw with. And thankfully, that's changed, but it was something I had to really dig into. And you struggle with isolation if like me, you struggled to name any deep friendships. You struggle with isolation if you're not friends with any people that are different than you, that force you to think, to reevaluate your positions and your beliefs. And you struggle with isolation if you can't think of a recent time that a friend challenged or corrected you. And in this case, I'm thinking of someone outside your family that has said, hey, look, that needs to change, that needs to go. If you can't think of a recent time that happened, you're probably struggling with isolation.
And Jesus seems quite concerned about this. Now, he doesn't use the words isolation, but he's always talking about loving one another, specifically in John 13-17. And we've all heard this from the day we were born to we've heard this a gazillion times. So why should we pay attention specifically today?
Yeah, often, let's be honest, we hear the word love and we kind of inwardly yawn. It's kind of, I know this already. Can't we talk about something new? Can't we talk about something deeper? But the bad news is the evidence is against us. And that's what's hard here is very few people around the world would look at the church and say, that place is the flag bearer of love. And of course, often it is. There are so many local churches, local bodies that just do a fantastic job of loving each other. I love the church, and the church is Christ's bride, and Christ loves the church. I love the church. But let's be honest, there's also a lot of messes there. Churches divide and split. Marriages struggle. Parents and children fight and argue. Christian leaders publicly accuse and slander each other, all while the world watches. If we're honest, Jesus-like love is hard, and we don't always do a very good job of it.
And we forget what the standard is. We forget that the standard is Jesus says to love you is to love one another as I have loved you. And when you think about it like that, I'm a little bit more motivated to take out the garbage for you. Just slightly. Not a whole lot, but just slightly. The standard is really high.
Yeah, and most of us can think of people we struggle to love. As soon as I say that, faces flash to my mind. There are certain people that they rub us the wrong way. We struggle to love them. They irritate us. And it's not our natural reaction. If someone hurts us or slanders us or makes life difficult for us, love is not my first thought. How can I love this person doesn't cross my mind in those moments.
But, we see Jesus' top priority, right? You look at John 17:20-23. First of all, it's one of the few passages in the Bible that the Trinity is communicating. Right,
incredible.
It's amazing. And then what's also amazing is Jesus doesn't just pray about himself. He prays for the disciples and for us, and that we may have unity and that we may love one another, which is really amazing.
Yeah, I love this passage. We're listening in to the Son of God talk to his Father, this intra-Trinitarian conversation. And like you said so well, he doesn't just pray for himself. He doesn't just pray for the guys in the room. He prays for us, which is incredible. And so we ought to be paying attention and going, well, what does he pray for us? I mean, I think this is the only place in the Bible that we get to listen in where we get to listen as Jesus prays for us. That's incredible. And the thing that he prays for, like you said so well, is unity. And why is this? Well, he says, I pray that they would be one just as we are one, Father. And so what we see is we see that isolation and division strike against the core of God himself. So God himself, as Father, Son, and Spirit, live in unity, in oneness, in mutual love. This is the very heart of God, and this is what he wants for us. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, that before God was ruler or king, obviously he's always been all of those things, but he's Father. From the beginning, he's Father. He's loving Father. And I think this is why John can declare that God is love in 1 John chapter 4. And that's such weird grammar, like we would never say that about someone else. We might say that person's loving, or they love well, or they like to love, but we'd never say, John is love. Mm-hmm. And I've heard some people teach this and they say, oh, John's just using hyperbole. I say, oh, that's utter nonsense. No, John's describing God as he is, as Father, Son, and Spirit. He is love. And so this is why this is such a big deal to Jesus. And this is why we can't just yawn and move on.
I think it's really important as well because, obviously it matters to Jesus. And then when we think about it, okay, it matters to the Son of God and he's telling us to do it. That means it should matter to us. Not just at I need to take the garbage out. Like, not that level of matter. Like, it should change our lives. And I think some of the questions that we need to ask us, or I need to ask myself specifically, is how am I treating my neighbor? Am I treating my neighbor like that? Am I treating my parents like that? Am I treating my classmates like that? Am I treating my siblings like that? Am I treating them the way that, this sounds really preschooly, but am I treating the way Jesus would treat them?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Like, this is why this so often doesn't get preached. This is why this doesn't get taught, because we go, oh, this sounds like preschool. Be nice to your neighbor. And yet we don't talk about it, but the Bible talks about it everywhere. And of course, Jesus talks about it in a couple key spots in this section in John 13 to 17. The first one, and these are such familiar passages, but they're so rich. John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35 says this. He says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another. And the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, wait a second, Jesus, how is this a new command? Like, this command to love your neighbor comes from Leviticus 19. Like, this is like first 3 books of the Bible sort of stuff. Jesus has already quoted it multiple times in his ministry. How can he sit there with a straight face with these 11 disciples and say, a new command I give you, love one another?
Well, I think this is different. I think this is a new command because before Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Now he's saying, love one another as I have loved you. So this is a completely new standard that he gives us. Yeah,
all of a sudden it's in the same way I've loved you, you're to love each other, which makes me think, Caleb, what are some of your favorite stories from the gospel about how Jesus loved people? If this is the standard, let's get in touch with his love.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think I love the one where he touches the leper. Mm-hmm. Touches the leper is really, it's the definition of loving someone that hasn't done anything to you.
Yeah.
It's like
nothing to give.
If he loves the disciples, you expect it.
Mm-hmm.
A
little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, no, you're right.
But like a more,
for sure,
especially in that culture where a leper was like cast aside. Like we don't really have that in our culture today. Cast someone aside. It's not our mindset. So it's hard for us to comprehend how big of a deal this really is, isn't it?
Yeah. Another one I think of, and this is kind of a different version of love, but I think of the hard conversations he kept having with the disciples. Why are you arguing about being first? He's always challenging their pride because he loves them. Or I think of when he's rebuking the religious hypocrites. That's love. Love isn't just the soft and squishy stuff. It's also the confronting of sin. But notice who he confronts. he's not confronting the world. He's confronting those who claim to be righteous and are really not loving. So we see Jesus in love confront those who don't love.
It's really amazing. It's a really high standard. Like, it makes me, it's like, you think of Luke 6, where Jesus tells to love our enemies, and that loving our enemies is the chief difference between children of God and not children of God.
Yeah, I hate that passage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Luke 6 is like my least favorite chapter in the Bible. I mean, because when someone verbally attacks me, or they gossip about me, or they do what's best for them instead of me, the last thing I want to do is love them. But then Jesus comes along and he says, that's the mark of being a child of God. He says, anybody can love those who love them. You want to know if you're children of your Father in heaven, love your enemies. And in a sense, he says something similar here in John 13. He says, by this, all men will know you are my disciples. This is the mark of being a disciple. It's to love one another in the way that Christ has loved us. It's to love our enemies. And, this makes me think, what are some of the other standards we use to judge if someone's a Christian? Because Jesus says this is the standard. And yet I don't think it's always our standard. We tend to think, oh, does that person live a good life? Or do they have the right beliefs? Or do they stand for truth? And of course, all of those things are important. But I think we're too quick, actually, to look at someone who claims they're a Christian and yet isn't loving, and yet still treat them as if they're a Christian. And Jesus just goes, no, this is the standard. Love is the standard.
That's all good and everything, but it's hard. Like, we struggle to love certain people, but I guess the next question is, what should we do if we are struggling to love certain people?
Yeah. Well, because we all struggle with it, right? So, and I think Jesus gives us some really helpful stuff even right in this passage. So he revisits this theme again in John chapter 15. And, he says the exact same stuff, love one another, but it's in this context of vine to branch. And so the first thing that we have to do if we're struggling to love is we have to abide in his love. We've got to get close to Jesus. We've got to hang out with the source of love. John 15, he says, remain in my love. And that's the first thing. And so often when we're struggling to love, we kind of grit our teeth and go, okay, how do I act loving? How do I be loving? But we need to take a step farther back and go, am I drawing near to the source of love? If God is love, if this is the very heart of who he is, then am I spending time in the Trinitarian relationship? Am I spending time in the Word? Am I letting him love me so that his love can flow through me to other people? Dave Needham at Multnomah, one of my favorite professors, he always used this example of, he was like, it's like you're holding this giant bowl above your head, and God's pouring his love into that bowl, and then you're just splashing it onto the people around you. And it's kind of a cheesy analogy, but I love it. And it's just this idea, are you receiving love from God so that it can spill onto people around you? And if you're not, that's the number one thing you need to do.
You said there's a few things, so give us the second one.
Well, the second one is this. I think we have to learn to see potential in people. And whenever I think of this, I think of the Apostle Paul. I mean, no one thought Paul was going to be the guy that would write most of the New Testament. No one thought Paul was going to be the guy that was going to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And yet, we know Jesus because of Paul, and because he took the gospel to the Gentiles, because he wrote the New Testament. And this is true of so many youth group kids throughout the years as well. Just this last week, I was talking with a guy who's in his early 20s now. He's one of my I have lots of favorite youth group kids, but he's definitely one of my favorite youth group kids from the years. And yet when I first met him, he was your age. And he was the most hyper 14-year-old. I mean, nobody believed, I don't think he believed that he would be the mature, godly adult that he is now. And I just talked with him this week, and he's reading his Bible, and he's engaged in ministry, and he's sharing his faith, and he's made a huge difference everywhere he goes. I mean, he's just fantastic. But nobody saw it when he was 14. And I remember I had to sit him down and go, I have vision for your life. And that's part of love. It's seeing potential in people and having love for them even when no one else can see it.
What's the third one?
The third one is this. I think we have to learn to have grace for people's brokenness. And part of that is getting in touch with them. It's that old, walk a mile in their shoes. How have they been hurt? How have they been ignored? How have they been shaped by their difficult circumstances, hard family life, hard suffering in their lives? So often people that are hard to love, they're hard to love because they haven't been loved. They're hard to love because they've been damaged, they've been hurt, and it's a defense mechanism in some way. And if we can get in touch with their brokenness, most of the time when we're struggling to love someone, it's because we're in touch with our brokenness. Like they've done stuff to hurt us. They've done stuff to annoy us. They've done stuff to damage us. And we're focused on how that's broken us. And that's real. And we can't ignore that. But if we can get in touch with their brokenness, then suddenly we have a little empathy. We have a little grace. We go, okay, I can see where they're coming from. Maybe I can find it in myself to love them because they're a result of their circumstances as well. Sure, they bear personal responsibility. I get that. But they haven't been loved well, and that's why they're most of the time so hard to love.
So, how do we love them then?
Well, I think we have to see them like God sees them. It's so hard for me to remember. This is his kid. This is his creation. He put his fingerprints all over that person. They have the image of God in them. They were created in his image. And it may be a broken image. It may be a damaged image, but they're still his kid. And so, when that person cuts me off when I'm driving, or when that person at the office is so obnoxious, or, whatever it is, stopping and going, but they're still his kid. And this really hit me when I became a parent. We've had 3 amazing kids, really cute kids. Everybody for some reason likes our kids, and I know why they do. I love our kids. I'm super biased. I love our kids. And when our kids have been little, I've imagined, it's never happened thankfully, but imagine if somebody came up to me and they just go, gosh, what an ugly kid. Like who could ever love that kid? I mean, gosh, what idiot gave birth to that kid? Well, if somebody ever did that, we would not be friends.
I feel bad for the person that said that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be friends with me and speak that way about my children. Loving me includes loving my kids. Because that's just how it works. And that's how it works for God. That's why John can say in 1 John, if you claim to love God but you don't love your brother, you're a liar. Mm-hmm. Because you cannot love God and not love his kids. And even that really broken person, as damaged as they are, they're still his creation. Mm-hmm. He hates their sin, but he still loves them. He still put his fingerprints on them. They're still created in his image. And so I think as soon as we can personalize someone and go, wait, that's God's kid, it just changes how we see people.
I think we've talked about a lot about love today, obviously. And I think there's a few things we can take away. First of all, love is the heartbeat of the Bible. It is the core, it is the center of it, because God is the one who wrote it. And if God wrote it, then what he wrote is love. Because he is love. And I think another one is when Jesus sums up the Christian life, it is love. And that sounds elementary, but when you think about it like at a deeper perspective, there's a bit of a conflict inside where I'm a bit like, thank goodness for your grace, Jesus, and also a bit like, man, I've really missed the point of this one. It really, yeah. And then also I was thinking about it when Paul talks about Paul talks about in his books, he doesn't talk about leadership or ministries as much. Like, he talks about loving one another. That is the core of his books. And Paul is the most influential writer in the Bible.
Yeah, I think specifically of 1 Corinthians 13, and we often just treat that as a passage for weddings and Valentine's Day, but actually it's a passage of how do you evaluate your life? How do you evaluate your ministry? And Paul says, look, if it's not love, you're just a bunch of noise. That's the standard that he gives us. And then think about, John picks this back up in 1 John. And I love what he says. He says, an old command I give you and a new command I give you. Love one another. And it's almost like he's saying, look, you want something tried and true, established and trustworthy? Love one another. You want something new and exciting, something that you haven't tried before, the latest program or thing? Love one another. Either way, love one another. Mm-hmm. And here's the point. Too often as Christians, we're disconnected, we're isolated, we're alone. And ultimately, this endangers our integrity. It damages our Christian lives. But more significantly, it goes against the very identity of who God is. He wants us to enjoy life-giving fellowship and love with one another, reflecting his love and fellowship in the Trinity. His vision for us is not that we're Lone Ranger Christians, not that we're independent and isolated and doing it on our own. He wants our lives and ministries to reflect the affection, the warmth, the sweet fellowship of the Trinity. And so he says, don't go it alone. Model your life on the example of God himself. Love one another.
Well, again, if you're struggling with isolation or things like that, these are some things that would probably help you to reach out and to love one another, and great things to tell other people about. And if you have found this this program helpful, then tell us in the comments, and we can tell us how we can improve it, tell us how we can make it better, things that you liked about it. If you know someone that you think would really enjoy it, then do again, put it in the comments or email Dad if you've got his email address, and we can send it to you. So
yeah, if you want to check out the study and you don't have it, just leave a comment on the video. We'll send that to you. And please, if this was helpful, share it with somebody that you know, pass it on. We'd love for this to be a blessing as many people as possible. Otherwise, thanks for joining us today and going along on this journey with us. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and God bless. Bye.
Bye.